totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
This is Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. The website bookedonrock.com. Susan Shumsky is our guest to talk about her book, The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles. The spiritual journey of the Beatles is the story of an entire generation of visionaries in the 60s who transformed the world. The Beatles turned Western culture upside down and brought Indian philosophy to the West more effectively than any guru. The Inner Light illumines hidden meanings of the Beatles' India-influenced lyrics and sounds, decoded by Susan Shumsky, a rare insider who spent 2 decades in the ashrams and 6 years on the personal staff of the Beatles' mentor, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. This eye-opening book draws back the curtain on the Beatles' experiments with psychedelics, meditation, chanting, and Indian music. Among many shocking revelations never before revealed, we discover who invented raga rock, and it's not the Beatles. The real identity of rare Indian instruments and musicians on their tracks. Which Beatle was the best meditator, and it's not George. Why the Beatles left India in a huff. John and George's attempts to return. Maharishi's accurate prediction. And who Sexy Sadie, Jojo, Bungalow Bill, Dear Prudence, Blackbird, My Sweet Lord, Hare Krishna, and The Fool on the Hill really were. Half a century later, the Beatles have sold more records than any other recording artist. A new generation wants to relive the magic of the flower power era, and is now discovering the message of this iconic band and its 4 superstars. For people of all nations and ages, the Beatles' mystique lives on. The Inner Light is Susan Shumsky's gift to their legacy. Susan Shumsky holds a Doctor of Divinity degree and has authored 20 books in English. She's released 36 foreign editions, won 41 book awards. To hear the songs we talk about in this episode, head over to the show notes page. Hi, Susan. Welcome to the podcast. I'm looking forward to this.
So am I, Eric. I'm so glad you invited me.
So many fascinating aspects of the Beatles, and this story is certainly one of them. And this story actually traces back further than maybe most realize. There's a track on the Beatles' first American album, Introducing the Beatles from 1963, that foreshadowed the deeper lyrical direction the band would eventually take, and that's called There's a Place.
Yeah, in that song, they talk about that there's this place within your mind that you can go to that's peaceful, that's harmonious, that's filled with light, filled with love. And that's the place that they were seeking later in their career, that place of transcendental awareness, of higher consciousness. So it really presaged that later psychedelic phase of their existence with this very, very early song.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. I had no idea how many of these early songs really show where they're headed. Another one is Norwegian Wood. This is the first pop song where a rock musician played an Indian musical instrument. You say this came out of a collision of George, some musicians from India, and the movie Help. How so?
The Beatles were recording and filming in the Bahamas, the film Help. And in that film, it was actually had an Indian theme, the film itself. It was about what's called thuggies, which were itinerant bad men, criminals from like the 17th century, 17th, 18th century. So that was the theme of the film. It was very Indian, and it had also Indian music in the background of the film and played by Indian musicians. But there's one scene in the film where they were at a restaurant. It was called Raja Rama Restaurant. And that was actually filmed in Twickenham Studios. But during that filming, there were some Indian musicians who were playing a rendition of a medley of Beatles songs with Indian instruments. And during the break, George went over to the sitar that was lying there, and he picked it up and he plucked it and tried to play it. And he said, "Oh, that's weird. That's a weird sound." And so that was the first time that George ever experienced the sitar. Also, during the filming in the Bahamas, when the Beatles were riding bicycles around and around, there was a Swami who had an ashram there on Paradise Island from the Shivananda ashram, and his name was Vishnu Devananda. And he came up to the Fab Four, and he actually handed each of them a book, his book, which was a Hatha Yoga book, a book about yoga exercises. It was actually the first Hatha Yoga book ever published in the West. So that's how the Beatles got introduced to Indian culture and Indian music.
Yeah, it's almost like that was meant to happen. That's the interesting thing about that story.
Yeah.
The song Nowhere Man, that marks a major shift in John's songwriting process. He later said, quote, letting it go is what the whole game is. Can you talk about this song? I've heard a Beatle fan recently refer to this as Now Here Man, which I thought was interesting because as in the moment, right? Can you talk about this song a little bit?
Yeah, Nowhere Man was very interesting because it just appeared to John. He had been trying to write a song for like 5 hours, and then suddenly it just popped into his head. It was like a direct cognition or a direct revelation, which is a very Eastern concept, to just suddenly have this kind of revelation where it all appeared to John. And then he was in a kind of a state between waking and sleeping when he got this revelation. So then he went ahead and wrote the song immediately. And it's a very profound song because it's really about the void or the nothingness or that place, once again, of transcendental consciousness.
And it's interesting because you mentioned these songs in the book because it all plays a role. It's all leading up to when they get to India. So that's what's interesting about their mindset was already there. It was developing before they go to India, right?
It was developing. And then, of course, when they started getting into LSD and they were having these sort of cosmic experiences, they really were getting into Eastern wisdom and Eastern philosophy. They were reading that book, The Psychedelic Experience, which Tomorrow Never Knows really quotes verbatim that book, which John stumbled upon at the bookstore and sat down on the settee and read the whole thing in one go.
In John's final interview, he said it dawned on him that the answer lies in one word, love. It's the underlying theme to the universe or to everything that was worthwhile. So with that, I want to ask you about the song The Word from Rubber Soul. How important is this song to the story of the Beatles' spiritual journey?
That's just remarkable that he wrote that song before getting into Indian philosophy or anything Indian. It was a prescient of mantra. Mantra is a sound, it's a word or group of words that takes you to higher consciousness. And in fact, when the Beatles learned transcendental meditation from Maharishi, they were all given mantras. And so this word, say the word and you'll be free. I mean, really, it's so amazing that he was talking about mantras before he ever heard the word mantra, before he even knew what it was.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It is. And drugs weren't just part of the Beatles' creative process in the mid to late 60s. It was the thing among the creative community. But you write in the book about its influence on George, particularly LSD. And he talked about how it opened him up to the idea of love more than ever before. Paul had quite an experience the first time he took LSD, and he later talked about taking an LSD trip with John where he said they dissolved into each other. I don't think there's a better example of the LSD influence than Tomorrow Never Knows, 1966. Can you talk about John's lyrics in this? You write that the song is a meditation manual.
That quotes verbatim that is actually from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Which Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert and Metzler, I think that was the name of the third guy, they wrote this manual, The Psychedelic Experience, which is a manual for druggies, for hippies, to take LSD and to know to describe their experience and how to deal with it. So it was LSD manual, a way to have a trip. And so those lyrics, relax your mind, flow downstream, taken verbatim from that book, The Psychedelic Experience, which was a translation from the original Tibetan Book of the Dead. Bardo Thodol, it was called.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is an example of how people will believe what they believe no matter what. And John Lennon insisted it's not a coding for the initials LSD.
It was frustrating for him because the fact is he was open about every other instance where he was referring to drugs in his song. So why would he be inconsistent? He admitted all the other times that songs were about drugs or the lyrics were about drugs. So we should believe him.
Frustrating though, right? I mean, he's got to answer that question. How many times he must have been asked that too? It's like, how many times can I tell you? It's not. Yeah. Susan Shumsky is the author of The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles, which is out now. The Beatles traveled to India in February of 1968 with their wives and girlfriends. As I mentioned in the intro to this interview, Susan, you were on the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's personal staff for 6 years, and you lived in ashrams for 20 years, correct?
Yeah, I was in Maharishi's various ashrams for 2 decades. The ashrams I was in India for about six months or so. And I was in Europe for 6 years on his staff. I was in the United States. We had an ashram in Fairfield, Iowa. So traveling in various places with Maharishi or in his ashrams for a very long time.
And for those who don't know, ashram is a place where people go on spiritual or religious retreats. Is that?
That's a very good definition of it. Yes, Eric.
Now, he passed in 2008 at the age of 90, and I could fill hours asking you about this experience. But can you give us a story or two from that experience to give us an idea of who he was and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, Maharishi was this amazing, charismatic personage. He had this incredible energy field around him. Those of us who were on staff were always competing to try to get close to him. It was it was pretty intense. It was an emotional roller coaster up and down, being on his staff and being in his presence. And he exuded this amazing quality of love. It was like when you were near him, you could feel these waves of love pouring into you. I mean, it was like you were receiving divine love by osmosis. So I can really understand why the Beatles were so attracted to that and attracted to him, because he is so filled with love, filled with bliss, and always giggling. The press called him the giggling guru, and he was always in a happiest person I ever met, and made everyone feel like they were the most important, the only thing that was in front of him was this person, and this was the only, and the time was only now, only the present was the time. It was a very intense cosmic experience to be in his presence, but he had his shortcomings.
Yeah, well, okay. I was going to ask, is there anything that's misunderstood about him, or you're saying he had his shortcomings? So I mean, he was human like everybody else. So he had his flaws.
He was human like everyone else, and John really wanted him to be a lot more than that.
Right,
he
like
really
a father figure.
That was part of it. I suppose if we want to psychoanalyze John, that might be part of it. But mainly, he really wanted him to be the master. Tell me, oh master, sort of thing. And so of course, when you have somebody up on a pedestal, they're going to eventually fall down from the pedestal. And that's what happened in India, because he didn't really turn out to be what John expected. Paul wasn't like that. Paul just thought, oh, this is a man teaching us meditation. And, and in fact, Paul told George, well, he's not a god, and he never said he was a god. In fact, he said he's a human being. He's just a meditation teacher. So why did you expect more of him than that?
The effect that he had on the music that would come out from the time the Beatles returned It's fascinating. George recalled recording the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album right after returning from India, and it was written and recorded from November of 66 to January of 67, and then released May 26th, 1967, just in time for the Summer of Love, as you write. Among the famous faces on that iconic album cover, such as W.C. Fields, Lenny Bruce, Mae West, Fred Astaire, Marilyn Monroe, and Marlon Brando, are spiritual masters. And your book includes a numbered map to connect the names to the faces we see. The spiritual masters, those were chosen by George, the ones we see on the album cover?
That's correct. On the Sgt. Pepper album cover, George chose Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, his guru, Sri Yukteswara, his guru, Lahiri Mahasaya, and then Babaji, the yogi, what's called the Yogi Christ in Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, which was George's favorite book. George used to order crates of that book and give those books out to everyone. So did Elvis, by the way.
Oh, he
Elvis
did?
Also had a great fondness for Autobiography of a Yogi. And
one of my all-time favorite Beatles songs, again, there's so many great ones, but Strawberry Fields Forever from 1967's Magical Mystery Tour, because that's one of the first songs I remember hearing as a kid and just really taking to it. This is a real place used as a metaphor. Can you talk about the real place and how does it end up becoming a Beatles song title?
The place, Strawberry Fields, was a children's home in Liverpool and a place where orphans would go to live. And so that was a place that John used to go and visit when he lived in Liverpool when he was a child, because it had beautiful woods around there. So it was a place that it was like a refuge for him in a way. So the song is really about that refuge, that place of utopia, you could say, that place which is within us, which is within every one of us. We have that pure consciousness, that beingness, where we can experience during meditation complete peace and calm and relaxation and safety and security. So that was that idyllic place, the halcyon place of John's youth that he sang about in Strawberry Fields Forever.
Fool on the Hill from Magical Mystery Tour. Paul sings of a man having the capacity to keep perfectly still in the midst of the hurly-burly, open to ridicule because of his beliefs, but his beliefs may be right. He recorded it 1 month after he met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, but he wrote it before ever hearing about him, as if Paul were meant to meet this man, you think?
Yeah, I mean, Paul says that he was writing about someone like Maharishi, and he was inspired by somebody who missed World War II because he was a hermit living in a cave. That was his inspiration for the song. But really, it was suitable, described Maharishi very, very well. So that's why Paul said, it was about someone like Maharishi.
George wrote It's All Too Much, which comes from the Yellow Submarine album from 1969. This song refers to a teaching from the Tao Te Ching. I believe I pronounced that right. Tao Te Ching, right?
Yeah.
That says, the more you know, the less you understand. Can you talk about what Tao Te Ching is and what that statement, the more you know, the less you understand, means?
The Tao Te Ching is an ancient Chinese scripture. It forms the basis of Taoist philosophy, and it was written by Lao Tzu, who is like this mythical creature. I mean, I'm sure he was a real person at some point, but has become very large in the eyes of many seekers as someone with great wisdom. And that is a very short book, but it has amazing wisdom in it, the Tao Te Ching. So this particular idea of the more you know, the less you understand is really talking about book knowledge or intellectual knowledge, that is not the real knowledge. The real knowledge is wisdom from within. And you develop the wisdom from within, not by reading books, but by developing your consciousness and raising your consciousness, and eventually being able to receive guidance and wisdom and healing and inspiration from within yourself.
Across the universe, An absolutely stunning piece of music written by John, and it ends up on the Let It Be album, released in the spring of 1970. This is his love letter to transcendental meditation, also known as TM. What is transcendental meditation, and can you explain John's lyric in the song where he sings Jai Guru Deva? What is he saying there?
Transcendental meditation was the meditation technique that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi brought to the West. And during his lifetime, he trained 40,000 teachers of transcendental meditation. And those teachers taught 6 million people how to meditate, which is really quite an accomplishment of what he did during his lifetime. And I was one of those people, and the Beatles also. They learned transcendental meditation. They learned it when they went to Bangor, North Wales in August of 1967. They learned from Maharishi at that time. The song Across the Universe came to John just like that other song, Nowhere Man, just during a somnambulant state, in a state between waking and sleeping. He cognized this song and went downstairs and wrote it immediately. This song is so beautiful. It's one of the, I think it's my favorite Beatles song. So amazing. And it really describes the meditation experience. And during the song, he repeats Jai Guru Deva. Oh, I can't sing. I shouldn't try. Jai Guru Deva.
Yeah.
So he sings it over and over. And what that means is it means glory to the divine teacher, the divine guru. And that song referred specifically to the guru, Maharishi's guru, Guru Dev. And his name was Swami Brahmananda Saraswati. And he was the head of the Hindu religion for North India during the mid 20th century. And he was Maharishi's teacher. So Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, he would never say hello, goodbye, have a nice day. He would never shake hands with anyone. Instead, he would put his hands together, palms together, and he would say, Jai Gurudev. And he said that 100 times a day. Whenever he met, greeted, or said goodbye to anyone, it was always Jai Gurudev, Jai Gurudev. And he just put his palms together, which is in India, that's called pranam. Pranam means you are bowing to the God within the other person when you put your palms together.
On the more humorous side, we have Why Don't We Do It in the Road from 1968's The White Album. You could have given me 100 guesses as to what this song is about when I first heard it, and I still would not have guessed it right. What is this song about, and how does it tie in with the Maharishi?
That song is about Paul at the ashram, sitting at the ashram, looking out over the grounds, and he sees 2 monkeys copulating in front of him, not too far away from him. And then he gets this idea, well, look at, they're just doing it in the road there. And why aren't humans this free? Why do humans make such a big deal out of sex? Why is it so, people keep it hidden from view? Why is it so shame around it and all that? He noticed that, the male monkey just hopped on the female and nothing much, no big deal. And then it was over and the female just went on her way as if nothing had happened.
And thus a song was born.
Thus a song was born, indeed.
Revolution is one of the best-known Beatles songs. John inspired to write this thanks to the Maharishi effect. What is the Maharishi effect?
During the mid-20th century, there was a Cold War going on, and it was scary. And those of us who were young at that time, we were afraid that when we would hear an airplane going over our heads, that a bomb would drop on us, an atom bomb. And in the classroom, at school, we had to duck and cover, as if that would really deter an atom bomb, So we were terrified of, the Russians are going to bomb us. So during that time, Maharishi came to the West, and he claimed that even way back in the very beginning of his career, like 1962, 63, he claimed that if a certain percentage of the population would meditate, they would bring vibrations of peace and harmony to the earth, and thereby we would have world peace. So that message really resonated with me. And I think it resonated with the Beatles, who actually survived the Blitz over Liverpool in the 1940s. You know, they managed to live through that. So this idea of creating world peace through meditation was a very, very charming and seductive idea to us. We wanted this. We really, really wanted this. So John wrote a song about it, Revolution, where he said that you can't have world peace by changing the institutions. You have to change your mind instead. And that's what Maharishi always used to say. He said, we will never have world peace by signing treaties, by having this institution or that institution. The only way that we can have world peace is if individuals are at peace. He used to always say that in order for the forest to be green, the trees must be green. In order for the world to be at peace, every individual must be at peace. And he made a formula of, you know, if we have 10% of the population meditating, and then he changed it to 1%, and then he changed it to 1% of 1%. And he kept making it a smaller and smaller number of people that would be required in order for us to have world peace, because he was seeing that it really was happening. He actually did scientific research on it. He would send people to war-torn places or to crime-ridden areas, and then they would do statistical analysis on that, the scientists. And they did these scientific studies, and they found out that when people meditate in these large groups in a place that is at war or high crime, that the crime rate goes down, that the war subsides.
Blackbird is just so beautiful. This is also off the White Album. To read in your book what it's really about gave me goosebumps. For quite a while, it was thought that this was simply a song Paul wrote. Just he woke up, here's a blackbird singing outside his window, and he writes a song. But there's a much deeper meaning to this song, according to Paul. What's the meaning behind this song?
Yeah, I mean, I believed the same way you believed. Even when I heard the other story about it being about the civil rights and a woman in the civil rights, a Black female, broken wing, learned to fly and so on, I still thought it was about the Blackbird. But then I dug up an old recording that was made right after he recorded that song, where he said that it was about the civil rights movement. And it was something that when they heard in Britain that this was going on, he had compassion for the Afro-Americans that were going through this civil rights movement and through, all the bloodshed and everything that took place, whereby they eventually got their rights to vote, rights to even use a bathroom. It's a beautiful song. It's my favorite song from the White Album.
It's a stunning piece of music, as so many of these Beatles songs are. You write, quote, out of more than 30 Beatles songs written in India, one of the most popular is about Prudence Farrow, Dear Prudence, another from the White Album. Interesting in that the root of this story is really when Mia Farrow marries Frank Sinatra in 1966. This is interesting. Mia's sister Prudence, she feels overshadowed, wants to study with Maharishi in India. How does she become the central focus of this song, which was written by John?
Mia and Prudence were in India. In fact, they were there before the Beatles. They flew there from America with Maharishi in January of 1968. And Prudence had been meditating for a few years already. Mia had just learned. But of course, all of Maharishi's attention was on Mia because she was a celebrity. And Maharishi always tried to make up to celebrities because he was trying to spread his organization and he was trying to get people to meditate. So Prudence was jealous of her, as she had been for a long time, because Mia was always the pretty one, the one that got the attention, the one that was the darling. And Prudence was always kind of pushed aside. But she was very devoted to meditation. So she spent all her time at the ashram inside her room, meditating all the time. And really to the extreme, a little bit to the extreme. She didn't want to leave her room. And the Beatles were asked to look after her because they were staying in the same complex as her. And they were in a study group. John and George and her were in this little study group together. Unfortunately, because of the fact that she had taken a lot of drugs and LSD and really alcohol and everything when she was a teenager, really abused drugs in a maximum way, unfortunately, because of being unhappy, and her parents not there, always on the road. Her parents were famous director, famous actress. So because of that, unfortunately, she had a kind of a mental collapse in India. She had a mental breakdown. And it was quite unfortunate. Before her mental breakdown, the Beatles were trying to get her to come out of her room and be more social. So that song, they wrote that song about it.
Why don't you come out and play?
Yeah, come out and play.
Prudence Farrow is still alive, right? Mia and Prudence.
Yes, they're both still with us, yes. By the way, the Prudence story ended up a very happy ending. She got married, she has a beautiful family, she teaches yoga, she teaches Sanskrit. She became a Sanskrit scholar and really had a wonderful life after Maharishi basically cured her. When she was having her mental breakdown in India, she was escorted to Maharishi's bungalow every day, and he just had her sit there, or he had her actually in the corner doing yoga exercises, and paid attention to her and brought her back to life. Basically, it was quite a remarkable healing that took place in a very short time.
That's great. Yeah, she married Albert Bruns, I believe, in 1969, and they're still married to this day. Yeah. And there was eventually a falling out between the Maharishi and the Beatles. At one point, John and George suspected he was exploiting the Beatles for publicity. When did things start to go wrong?
There was this film deal that they were supposed to do. It was a film deal gone south. Maharishi promised the Beatles that they would have exclusive rights to film him in Rishikesh and to make a film about him and his guru, Guru Dev, Brahmananda Saraswati, and about the TM organization. So they were in discussions, and they in fact, Neil Aspinall flew to India to sign a contract to make this big deal happen of this film, this documentary film that they were going to create. And Mia was going to star in it, and Mia's brother, John Farrow, was going to direct it. And, all these plans were being made. And then Charlie Lutz, who was the head of the organization, TM organization in the United States, he suddenly showed up in India with a lawyer and with a contract. And the contract was with Four Star Productions. And it was a contract that had exclusive rights to film Maharishi for the next 5 years. And it was a signed contract. Charlie signed it on behalf of Maharishi. So one morning, John Lennon is bleary-eyed and bedheaded, and he comes to the door of his bungalow. He opens the door and looks out into the courtyard, and he sees a cameraman pointed at him, and he sees a director who yells, "Action!" Out of the blue. This happens. And because of that, John and George were very, very angry. They refused to leave their rooms to go to the lecture hall where the cameras and the lights were set up for filming. And it wasn't long after that they left the ashram.
You write, quote, "It might be surprising to learn that in the entire Beatles catalog, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey is one of the top 3 songs where Maharishi's influence is most obvious. You say that anyone who knew Maharishi, as you did, recognizes immediately that the lyrics John wrote were directed at him." Can you tell us more about that? What are the lyrics that we're listening for here?
So, come on. Anytime that Maharishi would want someone to meet with him, he would either say, come, come, or he would say, come on. So that was his way of inviting people to come into the meeting room and have a talk with him. Or if they would appear at the door of the meeting room, he would say, come, come. So that's one. And then it's such a joy. It's such a joy. Maharishi said it's such a joy probably 50 times a day. Everything was, oh, it's such a joy. It's such a joy. He always was saying that.
Okay.
And then there's take it easy. Take it easy. Maharishi used to always, whenever he would talk about meditation or even anything, any other problem that anybody would ever have, any problem in their life, or also meditation, problems with meditation or whatever, he'd say, take it easy, take it as it comes. Take it easy, take it as it comes. So that's basically, those are the lyrics of that song. And then everyone has something to hide except me and my monkey. I don't know. There were a lot of monkeys at the ashram. That's probably why he used that title. John said it was referring to Yoko Ono. But then, of course, he always changed everything and said it was about Yoko. The song wasn't about Yoko. I mean, the song was lyrics. It was Maharishi's little expressions that he always used to use.
I'm thinking of Jim Morrison also, Take It Easy, off that first Doors album. Take it easy, take it as it comes. That was a lyric that he used. Okay,
well, the Doors were very into transcendental meditation. Jim Morrison did not learn transcendental meditation, but the other Doors did. All the other Doors did. Robbie Krieger, I was actually had a big crush on Robbie. He and I had a little thing.
Oh, so okay.
Robbie Krieger was really into transcendental meditation. So is the drummer. What's
John Densmore.
Densmore, yeah. Yep. Densmore and Krieger were. They say that if it weren't for Maharishi, the Doors wouldn't exist, because they all met up and found out about each other by going to a transcendental meditation introductory lecture. That's where the Doors were born.
Yeah, and so no coincidence then that lyric.
No coincidence.
Take it easy.
That lyric is definitely Maharishi. Yeah.
You go into the post-Beatles solo recordings in the book. What influence do you think that whole experience in India had on the four members of the Beatles as they move into their solo careers?
Well, obviously George took it to the max.
Yeah.
But after he left Maharishi, he joined the Hare Krishna organization, the ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, that was founded by Prabhupada, Swami Prabhupada, who was an extraordinary human being. He founded this huge organization and all these temples. He didn't even come to the United States till he was already elderly. He was in his 60s or 70s, and he wrote 80 books after that. So, I mean, he was amazing. And George was very drawn to this Hare Krishna mantra. It was something that was a part of the culture back then, starting in Haight-Ashbury, when the swamis, the various disciples of Prabhupada, came to the United States and founded a temple in San Francisco in Haight-Ashbury. So the Hare Krishnas, we called them Hare Krishnas, were dancing and singing in Golden Gate Park. And George found out about it, and he bought the record. He bought a record that was recorded by the Swami Prabhupada. And he and John played the record, and they chanted. And when they were in the Greek Isles, as they were traveling around, they were chanting. They chanted for until they couldn't even talk anymore. They were chanting and chanting and chanting for hours and hours and hours. And there was another time when George was driving on a long drive for, 20 hours or something, where he was chanting the whole time. And one time when he was on a plane, he swears that he saved his life by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra as the plane was going through a horrible storm, and it kept losing altitude, and the lightning had struck the plane several times. And George was chanting at the top of his lungs this Hare Krishna mantra. So he was really into Hare Krishna mantra, and then eventually met these kids who were in San Francisco starting that temple there. He met them in London because they went to London to found the organization in London. He did an actual album of chanting of the Hare Krishna chanters. It was Radha Krishna was the name of the album, Radha Krishna Temple. And it was an album of Indian chanting. And he also did the Hare Krishna mantra, became a #1 hit in England, and it was on the top of the Pops TV show. And he also donated their big ashram outside of London, the Bhaktivedanta Center. And he also signed the lease for the rent of their temple in London, in Soho, on Bury Street.
The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles. So it's out now through Permuted Press, and it is available wherever books are sold. Are there websites, any social media sites that you want to let people know about, Susan?
My websites are drsusan.org, drsusan.org, and also divinetravels.com. That's DIVINE travels, plural on the travels.com.
What do we find there at Divine Travels?
My wonderful tours to sacred destinations and cruise ship seminars, conferences at sea. I'd love for y'all to come on one of our amazing voyages at sea. Divinetravels.com.
Susan, this was great. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
Another episode in the books. Thanks as always for listening. I'm Eric Senich. Make sure you join me again next time for another brand new episode of Booked on Rock.
That's it. It's in the books.